articulated a whole program of action that needed to be taken. But one of the things they focused on was this idea of values and our conception, our relationship to nature. And this is what they said. They said that only drastic economic and technological changes on a global level could avoid major and ultimately global catastrophe. But they said these changes themselves will only be possible if fundamental changes in the values and attitudes of human beings occur, such as a new ethic and a new attitude towards nature. Now this recognition is now a growing recognition across the board. The United Nations did a report in 2000 with their environmental program. 850 experts, dozens of UN agencies, 30 environmental institutes, basically came out and they said the present course is clearly unsustainable, postponing action is not an option. But they called for a shift in values, away from material consumption. Without such a shift, they warned, environmental policies can only affect marginal improvements. So what we're seeing is that the shift in values comes tied with a shift in our mode of social organisation. These things have to come together. There are basically four key kind of lines of inquiry that all of us need to think about, all of us need to get involved in, need to actively start exploring. And there are already very, very interesting developments in all of these key areas. And as you can see, the slide is pretty bare compared to my other slides. I was coming to the end of my preparation, so I apologise for that. On the first point, the idea of participatory economics, there are some really, really interesting ideas coming out now from economists in the United States. There's two guys, you may have heard of them, Michael Albert, who runs ZNet, and Robin Harnell, radical economists who invented this idea of participatory economics. And what their argument is that it's not just about redistributing wealth, it's about reconfiguring inherently unstable manner in which wealth is manufactured and speculated. And what they're saying is that we need to start thinking about ways in which local people can be directly involved in controlling their economies. Some really interesting ideas. Point two, renewable energies. What we need to do, without a doubt, is transfer as swiftly as possible to renewable energies. This is not an option. And this is actually completely viable. There was a study done in London by the Institute of Science and Society. And what they did, they came up with this model called green economic growth. And they studied a whole variety of renewable energies, from solar energy to wind turbines, and all different kinds of things. And it was a very extensive report. They released it, I think it was late last year. And they basically said that this is not only a viable strategy, it's a much more economically sound and efficient strategy, and it's one that is more likely to be more just on a social basis. The vision that they were offering was of a post-industrial society that is truly free of CO2 emissions. Now contrast that with what I mentioned before, the Guardian report from John B. Dow, where Gordon Brown is now saying that let's just forget the climate aims that we've already got. Even the aims that they had already were fundamentally problematic. If you look at what the Stern report was saying, you remember the Stern report? We're focused on how climate change is going to be a huge cost to our economy, that we need to do something about it. Do you know what he actually recommended? He said that the minimum level of CO2 emissions that we can stabilise at, and we can afford to do that, is 550 parts per million. Now we've already said that 400 ppm is when, once you pass that mark, you start getting into the area of rapid, dangerous climate change. And this guy is saying that don't worry, everything's fine, we've got the next 20 odd years, and we can keep going, keep pumping it out, and we should be okay. What does that mean? It means that somewhere a decision was actually made that at that level of global average temperature, at that level of devastation that would be created primarily in the developing world, that's fine, that's acceptable. That's an acceptable degree because we have to maintain this current way of working. The third question of the decentralization of political power. Now again, there are many ideas. I'm not coming and advocating that here is a set of political solutions, this is what we need to do. But there are many new ideas about what we can do. A book came out a couple of years ago by George Monbiot called The Age of Consent. George Monbiot, the well-known environmentalist who writes for The Guardian. Now, this is actually a really interesting book because in this book, he described a whole new set of ideas for establishing the idea of a global people's parliament. He talked about using the internet to establish communication across different countries. He talked about all kinds of grassroots and local mechanisms that people could start doing now to encourage participation in political activity, to create a system, a new system of activity now, even as we speak, regardless of what the powers that be want to do. Let's start creating now. This was his idea. That's a book I would strongly recommend. I mean, there were some ideas that maybe you might think are outlandish, but I think it's time to start thinking as outlandishly as we can, given the scale of what we face. The fourth question of culture, a new ethical culture. All of these first three issues need to be linked to the creation of a culture that recognizes not only human interconnectedness, but the interconnectedness of human life with all life, and with the natural world, rather than seeing humankind as some kind of unconstrained overlord for whom the earth is just this tool of kind of unlimited, this resource of self-gratification. What all of these thinkers, what all of these experts and scientists are pointing towards is that a more accurate perception of reality, a conception grounded in science, is one that the human condition is fundamentally embedded in nature. It's not separate from nature. And that these non-materialistic ethical values that support the protection and enhancement of life actually reflect our fundamental relationship to nature, to reality. Just to give a few names of some of the guys who are working on these kind of issues. The first guy, Ahmed, is an Israeli-American sociologist. Now this guy, he served as a senior professor at Harvard Business School. He was also a former senior advisor to the White House. He's not a left-wing nutcase. This guy was up there, working with the top echelons. And this is what he said. He said, challenged is the entrenched, utilitarian, rationalistic, individualistic, neoclassical paradigm which is applied not merely to the economy but also increasingly to the full array of social relations. He said that there must be a key role for moral values within economies. And that quote is from his book called The Moral Dimension Towards the New Economics. Closer to home, the second guy, James Robertson, is a British author. Now this guy, again, very interesting, he worked as an aide to Prime Minister Howard Macmillan, a couple of decades ago. He then went on to work in the Cabinet Office, and he then went on to work for the MOD, Ministry of Defence.